If you're gonna know how to defend your faith, you need to know how to argue. Arguing is like kind of a bad word, because we don't want to be having arguments with people. When you think argue, you kind of feel people screaming at each other, and it's a bit icky,
I don't know what we're yelling about!
But if we break it down to its most basic level, arguments just mean that you are proposing a contrary idea that you want to discuss. Anytime you debate with somebody what you want to have for lunch and you try to convince each other that your place is right, you are having an argument. You may have heard the phrase many times, I don't want to argue about it. But any form of civil discussion can be an argument. These things aren't necessarily bad. It's more understanding how each culture views debating their disagreements. If you go online and you check out Apologetics, you're going to see a lot of people debate each other in a very formal setting.
Like what I would say to Martin Luther King, if I was trying to make
I agree about the description of the Bible. I'm simply saying that
it's not a description, Dinesh.
A Christian book.
You'll have one person on one side vehemently arguing against the truth of Christianity, and another, the passionate defender of the Christian faith, on another, proposing their beliefs. These are a lot of fun to watch, but they can be a little tough because the reality is this is not how most cultures and most people will solve their differences. So to communicate correctly, let's look at the various ways that different cultures have an argument. One area is in uncertainty avoidance. Certain cultures like Greece or Russia want to be given very, very clear instructions down to the letter. They don't like ambiguity, they don't like guesswork, and they don't like kind of figuring things out for themselves. Not to insult Greeks or Russians, they're a very intelligent, industrious people, but they expect instructions to be clear and unambiguous. And for people of a particular theological mind, this kind of thinking is actually very exciting. You want to get into the in-depth minutiae particulars of Christian theology and doctrine, because those tiny little differences here and there cause such juicy theological debates that are so exciting, and it's great if you're like that. But a lot of cultures are not like that. A lot of cultures really thrive with kind of vague instructions and freedom to do a lot of guesswork.
Figured out.
You figured out.
Figured out.
In cultures like Jamaica or Singapore, they are expected to figure a lot of things out for themselves when they're given instructions. There can be more of an easygoing approach to particulars that are really more dependent upon the hearer. The next area is rhetorical traditions. Rhetoric is the style of language we use in order to have an argument. People in the West have a very strong emphasis on logic and having a cohesive, well put together argument. Possibly the most famous example of this is what's called a syllogism, where you say if premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, then the conclusion has to be this. The most famous example being all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This would be a very logical Western style of reasoning, whereas an Eastern style focuses more on emotions and shared experiences. An Eastern philosopher might want to dig into the story behind Socrates. How did he die? How do we know he was mortal? And really dig into those juicy details. Jesus himself focuses more on the Eastern rhetorical style by teaching us doctrine through a story teaching method. Parables themselves are a very famous tool of Eastern rhetoricians who want to convince you not so much through a syllogism or fact, but by the story and its emotional appeal. Whereas Paul spends more time focusing on the syllogism and building a logical argument for his case. A very famous example of this would be found in Acts 17, where Paul is preaching to the Athenians. He doesn't use much biblical references or appeal to biblical authority, but focuses on a syllogistic argument and a logical argument based on what the people there already believe. The next rhetorical tradition we'll examine would be appeal to tradition. Some cultures believe that ancient traditions and wisdom that has been applied to the community for many generations is inherently of high value, whereas other cultures believe that challenging authority or giving everyone a voice is inherently good. If you were working with a culture within China, you might want to make your appeals going back generations to ancient philosophers and people from long ago that are highly respected. Showing that you come from an authoritative ancient tradition actually adds a lot of credence to your case. Other cultures such as Scandinavia are not particularly interested in what people thought long ago, but if those ideas work now. This is actually part of a very interesting trend that's happening in the West, where young people are less and less interested in the framework and belief system of generations gone behind them and more interested in what's happening right now. Some people think when you come in and you talk about Christianity, you're bringing in new ideas, sometimes weird ideas, and they don't value the new. But if you can show that Christianity, or at least the morals of Christianity, have a rich tradition within that culture by pointing to authoritative figures, your argument's going to be a lot stronger. Finally, let's look at the difference between a consensus culture and a conclusion culture. In certain cultures, particularly in tribal cultures, they're not particularly interested in someone being right and someone else being wrong. The most important thing is to achieve social cohesion and group harmony. Maybe you've had someone say to you in the past, "Let's just agree to disagree." Or another one of my favorites, "Well, you've got some good points and you've got some good points, so let's just say everyone has some good ideas." If you're like me and someone who likes to argue and likes a good, solid, meaty confusion, statements like this can kind of tick you off a little bit. Me, I'm a conclusion-based person. I want to come to an answer at the end of a debate. But other groups don't find this valuable. If you're in an area that has been historically plagued by social disunity, for example, places like Northern Ireland or Rwanda, discussing topics like politics or religion can be particularly difficult because they know they can quickly lead to violence. The horrors of social disunity leading to violence and leading to internal strife are so terrible that the concept of a conclusion is not particularly interesting to people that are promoting consensus. A famous example of this happened in Christianity at the Council of Nicaea. There was a heresy at the time called the Arian heresy, which taught that Jesus was a created being. So Emperor Constantine gets all the bishops together and say, "Okay guys, I want you to hammer this out and argue about it and come to a solid conclusion." But Constantine's ultimate hope was not that they would so much come to one solid conclusion, but they would bring the two groups together in social cohesion.
This did not happen.
The church got kind of angry and were like,
"No way whatsoever. We know that this is the truth. We know that Jesus was not created, and we will not have unity with dishonesty. There is no union between truth and lies."
Although Constantine wanted to create unity between theologies, the church wanted a solid, truthful conclusion. They thought truth was more important than social unity. Other groups believe unity is more important than the truth. Therefore, when talking in these groups, it's important to bear in mind the history and the impact that pushing a certain conclusion to the exclusion of other conclusions is going to have upon the hearer. And lessening this intensity and promoting a form of social cohesion as part of your message may be vital in helping people to understand the truth of Christianity. Oh, this is so difficult. Seriously. Why can't people just all just talk the same and communicate the same? Blah, blah. It's very, very difficult. But if you can get this, you're respecting people's cultures, you're doing a wonderful thing for them, and it is a loving thing that Christ has commanded us to do. What type of argumentation do you like to use? Well, hey, you decide.